Okay, so how do you take a classic play, one that's almost 200 years old, about corrupt Russian officials of all things, and make it actually interesting for a student today? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into. We're looking at a brand new curriculum for Nikolai Gogol's masterpiece, The Government Inspector, that tries to do just that.
So picture this, a tiny, middle of nowhere town. You know the type. Everybody knows everybody's business, and more importantly, every single person has a secret they're trying to hide. It's basically a pressure cooker of corruption and anxiety, just waiting for someone to light the fuse. And the fuse? It's a classic case of mistaken identity, and it is hilarious. The town's crooked officials think some random, broke clerk who's passing through is actually a high-ranking government inspector sent to expose them. And just like that, the whole town descends into this crazy spiral of bribes, lies, and ridiculous cover-ups. It's the perfect recipe for satire. All right, so here's our game plan. We've set the scene in this corrupt little town. Next, we're going to talk about the big challenge of teaching the classics. Then we'll dive into this new educational blueprint, see what it looks like in the classroom, explore the skills it teaches, and wrap up with why this old play still matters so much today. And this really gets to the core of the problem for teachers, right? In a world of TikTok and endless scrolling, how in the world do you get classic literature to actually stick in a kid's brain? Let's just put it out there. How do you draw a straight line from some dusty story about Russian bureaucracy to what an 11-year-old cares about? That's the billion-dollar question, and it's exactly what this new curriculum is trying to answer. And the way they're doing it is a huge shift. We're talking about moving away from the old school stuff. Memorizing lines, reading out loud, writing that same old boring essay. The new toolkit is way more dynamic. We're talking about digital creation, getting students to role play and debate, and even using AI to help them dig into the historical context. So what does this new blueprint actually look like? Well, it's all about using technology not as a distraction, but as a bridge that connects students directly to the literature. At the heart of this whole thing is something called project-based learning, or PBL. It basically means students aren't just sitting there getting facts dumped on them. Instead, they become investigators, working overtime to solve a complex problem, which, in this case, is figuring out this play. And this approach is proven to help students understand things on a much deeper level. And it's not just tech for the sake of tech. The whole thing is built on really solid ideas. The goal is to get students to really engage with the story, to use technology to think critically, and to apply their analysis in practical ways. And, of course, it all lines up with serious educational standards. Really, it all boils down to this: transforming reading from just another assignment into a full-blown experience. You're not just a kid reading a play. You're an investigator, you're a creator, you're a debater, you're in it. So what does this actually look like day to day? How does all this theory play out in a real classroom? Let's peek inside a lesson plan. Check this out. This is from Act 1. The focus is on the mayor's panic, perfect themes of fear and corruption. But look at the key task. It's not a quiz, it's a choice board, so students get to decide how they want to tackle the material. And the tech part is super specific. They're going to build a digital flowchart to map out how the panic spreads through the town. Of course, you can't understand this play without understanding satire. So the curriculum makes sure students get that Gogol is using humor for a reason. He's not just telling jokes, he's using comedy as a weapon to expose some really serious problems. So that flowchart project, it's a simple but brilliant three-step process. First, they analyze the scene where the mayor is freaking out. Then, they map out the chain reaction, the rumor, the panic, the stupid decisions. Finally, they get to be creative and use a tool like Canva to visually design that chain of events. They're literally creating a map of the chaos. And it doesn't stop there. The projects keep evolving. In Act 2, they switch from flowcharts to making their own 4-panel comic strips to capture those hilarious moments of mistaken identity. It keeps things fresh and lets students use different creative skills. Okay, this all sounds really fun, but what's the end game here? Well, these projects are secretly building skills that go way, way beyond just understanding some old play. Just look at the final projects. They have to debate a really tough ethical question. They have to write a formal report to the czar, which means getting the tone just right. They even design a political campaign for change poster. I mean, these are not your typical book reports. These are complex, real-world tasks. And that's the point. Through all of this, students are building serious skills in critical thinking, they're becoming way more confident with digital tools, And maybe, most importantly, they're starting to think about bigger ideas, like justice, corruption, and what it means to be a good citizen.
It completely changes the game. This isn't just a history lesson anymore, it's a civics lesson. They're not just looking back at some messed up town in the 1800s, they're using that story as a launch pad to think about how we can build a better, more honest world today. Which brings us to the big takeaway. After all this time, why does a play like The Government Inspector still hit so close to home?
The curriculum itself asks the perfect question. What can this old story about Russian bureaucrats possibly teach us about leadership, accountability, and the danger of falling for appearances in our own world? It turns out, a lot. Those themes are absolutely timeless. And in the end, that's the question Gogol leaves hanging in the air. A question that feels just as urgent now as it did back in 1836. When fear takes over, when we don't know who or what to believe, and when the people in charge are just trying to save their own skins, who do we become? That's something worth thinking about long after the final curtain.